The storm came without apology on the first night of the gathering. It arrived the way serious things do, quietly at first, a shift in the air, a darkening above the tree line, and then all at once it was simply there, enormous and indifferent, pressing against the tall windows of Vane Court until the candles trembled in their sconces, and the guests in the blue drawing room pulled their shawls a little tighter and pretended they had not flinched. There were 14 of them that week. 14 young women from 14 carefully selected families, arrived by carriage over the course of 2 days at the invitation of Lady Georgiana Vane, the Duke's aunt, by marriage, who had spent the better part of 6 months engineering this gathering, with the focused intensity of a woman who has made her mind up about something, and intends for the world to agree. The invitations had been gracious. The accommodations were impeccable. The purpose, though no one said it plainly in their letters, was understood by everyone who received one. Duke Aldrich Vane needed a wife. He had been home from the northern campaigns for exactly 22 days when his aunt had sat across from him in the study at Vane Court and explained, in the measured tone she used when she had already decided an argument, that the estate required continuity, that the earldom required heirs, and that the county required something to talk about that was not the fact that he had come home looking like a man who had left something behind in the north and had not yet decided whether to go back for it. He had listened. He had said very little. He had agreed to the gathering because it required less energy than continuing to disagree. And he was, at this particular moment in his life, conserving energy for things that felt more urgent than most things did. And so Vane Court had filled with women and their families and their chaperones, and their carefully pressed dresses, and their carefully rehearsed conversation, and Aldrich Vane had moved through the first day and a half of it with the composed neutrality of a man fulfilling a function, shaking hands and inclining his head and saying the correct things, and feeling, beneath all of it, the specific weight of a person who has gone somewhere very dark and has not quite returned. He was standing at the upper corridor window on the first night, watching the storm build over the western fields, when the horse broke free. He saw it happen. One of the stable boys had apparently not secured the rear gate properly against the wind, and a large bay mare, already unsettled by the weather, had pushed through it and come into the rear courtyard at a full canter, wet and wild-eyed and terrified by the storm that had followed her out. The guests who had been sheltering under the rear portico, watching the lightning over the hills, scattered immediately. There was screaming. There was a crash as someone knocked over a decorative urn. 2 footmen ran in opposite directions. The stable boy who had followed the horse into the yard was frozen near the gate, the lead rope in his hands, his face white. And then there was a woman in a gray cloak who walked out from under the portico, past the screaming, past the running footmen, into the middle of the courtyard, toward the horse. Aldrich watched her. She did not run. She moved at a steady, deliberate pace, and she was speaking as she moved, low and continuous, the way a person speaks when they understand that the sound of their voice is itself the thing that matters, not the words. She held out her hand, palm upward. She stopped. She waited. The horse circled once, twice, its hooves loud on the wet stone. Then it slowed. Then it turned toward her hand. It took her less than 3 minutes to get the lead rope from the stable boy and walk the horse back through the gate. By the time she had done it, most of the guests had retreated inside. A footman had reappeared to help secure the gate. The stable boy was standing with his hands pressed over his face. The woman in the gray cloak handed him back the rope, said something to him, and then walked back toward the house, through the rain, without looking up at the windows. Aldrich watched the place she had been standing for a moment after she had gone. Then he went to find Marcus. His secretary was, as always, somewhere nearby, which was less a coincidence than a practiced skill. Marcus Webb had been with the Vane household since before Aldrich had returned from the north, and he had the particular quality of a man who understands that his usefulness lies precisely in being present without requiring acknowledgement of it. The woman in the gray cloak, Aldrich said. Marcus did not ask what he meant. He had also been near a window. "I will find out," he said. "Tonight," Aldrich said, before breakfast. Marcus nodded and withdrew, and Aldrich returned to his room and stood at the window and listened to the storm finishing its business over the estate, and thought about a woman who walked toward frightened things instead of away from them. He thought about that for quite a long time. If you are watching Duke Royal Tales for the first time, welcome. If this story is already pulling at you, please take a moment right now to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Every single one of those gestures tells the story whether to keep going. Now, let us go back to Vane Court. Marcus's report came with the morning tea. Her name was Elara Moss. She was 23 years old. She had come to Vane Court not as a candidate, but as the companion to Lady Josephine Croft, who was the candidate. Lady Josephine was the daughter of Lord Croft of Derwick, a well-positioned family, pleasant people, genuinely enthusiastic about the selection. Lady Josephine was 19, kind, easily overwhelmed, and had brought Elara with her because Elara had been her companion for 2 years, and because, as Lady Josephine had explained to her mother, she was simply not able to manage without her. Elara's own background was quieter. Her father had been a physician, a respected one, in the town of Alerwick. He had died 4 years ago. Her mother had died 2 years before that. She had no siblings, no property, no title, and no particular connection to anyone at Vane Court beyond her employment with the Croft family. She was, Marcus noted in the careful neutral language he used, when conveying information he suspected would matter, not a name anyone at this gathering would have recognized. She also, he added, had grown up near the Alerwick stables on the edge of town, where her father had kept his horse, and had ridden since she was 6. Aldrich read the report twice. Then he folded it and set it on his desk, and looked at the morning light coming through the east window of the study, and thought about the deliberate way she had moved through the rain. He found reasons to cross her path over the next 3 days, not obviously, not in the way that could be observed and catalogued by the 14 candidates and their chaperones and his aunt, who saw everything and said nothing until she had decided exactly what she wanted to say. He moved through the gathering the way he had been moving, correctly, politely, giving each candidate the appropriate degree of attention. But in the in-between spaces, the library at 10:15, the east corridor near the morning room, the small passage that ran alongside the portrait gallery, he arranged to be somewhere that was not unreasonable, and found that she was there too, not because she was following him, because she was, in the way of people who are companions rather than guests, going wherever she was needed, which in a house as large as Vane Court turned out to cover a great deal of territory. He spoke to her for the first time on the second morning, in the library. She was on the upper step of the rolling ladder, retrieving a volume from the top shelf that Lady Josephine had apparently mentioned wanting, and she did not hear him come in. And he stopped at the door and looked up at her for a moment before he said anything. "Miss Moss," he said. She turned on the ladder without startling, which told him something. She looked down at him with a direct, considering gaze that most people in his house were careful not to use on him. He was the Duke of Vane. People looked at the area slightly to the left of his face, or at his collar, or at their own hands. She looked at his face. "Your Grace," she said. "You need a steadier ladder," he said. The one she was on had a slight wobble in the right wheel that had been there since before he left for the north. He had told someone to fix it. Evidently no one had. "The wobble is predictable," she said. "Once you know the pattern, it is manageable." She came down with the book under her arm and stepped off the bottom rung. She was not short, he noticed. She was simply not tall. She had dark brown hair pinned practically, and eyes that were a particular shade of gray that made him think of the sky the morning after a storm has cleared. And she was looking at him with the specific quality of attention that meant she was genuinely listening before he had said anything worth listening to. "The horse," he said. She looked at him. "You saw, from the upper window." She was quiet for a moment. She was frightened. She would not have hurt anyone on purpose. She paused. The stable boy was more frightened than she was, which made everything worse. Someone needed to be calm. "You were not frightened," she considered this. "I was, but the horse could not afford for me to show it, so I did not." She tucked the book under her arm more firmly. "It is a useful skill. Not showing a thing when showing it would make the situation worse." He looked at her for a moment. "I imagine it is." She gave a small, polite nod. "If you will excuse me, Your Grace, Lady Josephine is expecting this before her morning correspondence." She walked out of the library. He stood among the books and watched the door close behind her, and felt, for the first time in 26 days, something that was not the managed neutrality he had been carrying since he came home from the north. It was small. It was not comfortable. But it was real, and he had almost forgotten what real felt like. Her name was the first genuine thing that had happened to him since he returned. He was at war with himself about what to do with it. Lady Sybil Crane noticed on the third day. Lady Sybil was 25, the daughter of Lord Crane of Fairholt, and she had been considered by virtually everyone who had an opinion on such things, which in gathering of this kind was everyone, to be the most likely outcome of the week. She was extraordinarily beautiful in the way that requires both nature and effort, with copper hair and pale gray eyes, and a manner that was perfectly calibrated at all times, warm without being soft, composed without being cold. She had also been planning to be the Duchess of Vane since she was 17 years old, which had given her 8 years to think about exactly what she wanted and exactly how to secure it. She was not a cruel woman in the way that uncomplicated people are cruel. She was precise. She understood that what she wanted required the removal of obstacles, and she addressed obstacles with the same focused intelligence she brought to everything else. On the third morning, she watched the Duke move through the morning room, giving each candidate the appropriate degree of attention, and she noticed that his attention was not the same when it landed on Lady Josephine Croft's quiet companion as it was in every other direction. It was, she thought, barely perceptible, but she was a perceptive woman. That afternoon she wrote a letter to her brother Fenwick, who was staying at the inn in the village, 3 miles south of Vane Court. Fenwick Crane was 32, charming in a practiced way, and possessed of a talent for finding out things about people that people would prefer not to have found out. He had exercised this talent on Sybil's behalf on 3 previous occasions, and he had never once failed to produce something useful. The letter was short. It said, Elara Moss, Alerwick. Her father was a physician. Find what there is to find. She sealed it and sent it with her personal maid before dinner, and came down to the evening meal looking as she always looked, which was exactly right. Elara did not sit at the main dinner table. Companions did not, which was simply the architecture of these gatherings, and she had never expected otherwise. She took her meals in the smaller dining room with the other attendants, which was a quieter space, and which suited her more than the formal dining room would have anyway. She did not tell Lady Josephine this. She simply said the arrangements were perfectly comfortable, which was true. She had met Bet on the first morning. Bet was 17, a kitchen girl at Vane Court, round-faced and quick-eyed, and possessed of the particular intelligence of people who are considered unremarkable and have therefore been present, unnoticed, for every significant conversation in the house for 3 years. She had appeared beside Elara in the rear corridor on the first day, with a plate of apple cake and the matter-of-fact directness of someone who had decided to trust someone, and was not going to announce that she had decided it. They had been talking ever since. Bet was the one who told her about Fenwick Crane. He arrived on the 4th day under the reasonable pretense of visiting his sister, which no one could object to. He was charming at tea. He said the correct things about the weather and the house, and asked Lord Webb, who was a neighboring landowner and had come to dinner, about the local hunting. Nobody found him alarming. Bet found him alarming immediately, with the instinct of someone who has served food to enough people to know the difference between a man who is making conversation and a man who is conducting research. She told Elara in the back corridor at 4:30. He had been in the village that morning before he came to the house. He had spoken to the postmaster and to the woman who ran the lending library, and he had asked both of them whether they knew the name of Dr. Moss of Alerwick. Elara stood in the back corridor and felt the cold that comes with understanding what is happening. She had known this particular cold before. She had felt it 4 years ago when she first understood that the man who had accused her father of negligence had not been telling the truth, and that the truth had arrived too late to save her father's practice, or his reputation, or, in the end, his life. She thanked Bet. She stood in the corridor alone for a moment. Then she went to find Marcus Webb. She found him in the small office near the rear of the main hall, which was where he appeared to live when he was not at the Duke's side. He looked up when she knocked. He took her in with the brief, accurate gaze she had come to understand was his primary mode of operation, and set down his pen. "I need 10 minutes with the Duke," she said, "this evening, before dinner if possible." Marcus looked at her. She could tell he was running some kind of internal calculation. She waited. "What is it regarding?" he asked. "Something that will reach him from another direction if I do not give it to him from mine," she said. "I would prefer he have the true version first." Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded, and she understood from the way he nodded that he was not simply agreeing to a logistical request. He was agreeing with the approach. It was, she thought, the kind of agreement that meant something. She had 20 minutes before dinner. She used 10 of them sitting on the narrow bench in the back passage with her hands folded in her lap, deciding exactly what she was going to say, which was the same thing she always did before she said anything that mattered. She had learned, over years of being the person who said the thing that needed saying, that the shape of the truth mattered as much as the truth itself. Not to soften it, not to perform it, simply to know exactly what you were delivering before you delivered it. The Duke was in the study when she arrived. He was standing at the window as he often seemed to be, though this window faced the formal gardens rather than the fields, and he turned when Marcus opened the door and closed it again from the outside. She stood in the middle of the room and did not sit down. He did not ask her to. "Your Grace," she said, "there is something I need to tell you, and I am telling you directly because I think Lord Fenwick Crane is in the process of finding it out, and whatever version he intends to present to you has been designed to do damage, and I would rather you have the plain version instead." He said nothing. He was looking at her with the focused attention she had noticed was not decorative. It was real. He was listening from the beginning. She told him. She told him about her father, Dr. Emmett Moss, who had been a physician in Alarwick for 20 years and had been publicly accused of negligence in the death of a patient, a young woman named Charlotte Farr, who had died under his care from what appeared to be a worsening infection. He had been stripped of his practice and his standing. The county had made its judgment, and the judgment had been merciless. Her father had died 18 months later, and 6 months after his death, a letter had arrived from Charlotte Farr's younger brother, who had spent 2 years being unable to live with his own silence, confessing that Charlotte had not died of infection. She had been given something by a family member who had reasons which had accelerated her decline. Her father's care had not been negligent. He had simply been in the room when something unfixable was already happening, and he had not known it. The truth had come. It had simply come too late to be useful. She told him all of it. She told him that her father's name had never been formally restored because the legal process of doing so was expensive and complicated, and she had not had the resources to begin it. She told him that she understood the name Moss of Alarwick was a name that some people in the county still connected to disgrace, and that Fenwick Crane had clearly spent the morning establishing exactly that connection. She told him that she was not a woman who had hidden this because she was ashamed of it. She had hidden nothing. She had simply not volunteered it because it was not the kind of thing one announces, but that she was telling him now because concealment would be worse than disclosure, and she was a poor concealer, in any case. She said it in under 5 minutes. She said it clearly and without apology, because it was not her failing. It was her inheritance, and there was a difference. The study was quiet when she finished. The evening light came through the west window in long amber bars that crossed the floor and reached the desk, and lit the edge of the maps pinned to the wall behind it. The Duke had not moved. He was looking at her with an expression she could not fully read, except that it was not pity. She was certain of that, and it was not the particular careful blankness of a man doing the arithmetic of social liability. It was something steadier and more serious than either of those things. He said, 6 months after he died. Yes, she said. And the brother who wrote the letter. He is still in Alarwick. He works at the mill. She paused. He has offered several times to provide testimony. There has been no formal process to give it to. Aldrich was quiet. He looked at the maps on the wall. She waited. My own father, he said, and then stopped. He said it the way people say things they had not planned to say, and she stayed very still and gave the sentence room. My own father was accused of something, years before I was old enough to understand what the accusation was. It was financial. It was also false, though it took considerably longer than 6 months for that to come clear. He looked at her directly. I know what it costs to carry a name that has been handled roughly, and I know the difference between a person's character and a circumstance they were born into. Elara breathed out slowly. She had not realized she had been breathing carefully. I am not telling you this to make you feel better, he said, though I suppose it may. I am telling you because what Lord Fenwick intends to deliver to me tonight at dinner is already worthless, and I want you to know that before he delivers it. She looked at him. You will still let him deliver it? I will let him speak, the Duke said, and then I will respond to what he has said. She stood in the study and looked at this man she had known for 4 days, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time, the particular sensation of being seen without performance, of having offered the difficult thing, and had it received without flinching. It was a smaller feeling than it sounds, and a larger one than she could immediately account for. Thank you, she said. Elara, he said, and her name in his mouth was quiet and deliberate. She looked at him. I am glad you told me, she nodded. She walked to the door. Then she stopped. "Your Grace," she said without turning. "Whatever Fenwick Crane has found, it will not be the worst of what he intended. He will have something further. He is that kind of man." She paused. "I wanted you to know that I have told you everything I know. If there is something else, I genuinely do not know what it is." "I believe you," he said. She walked out. In the corridor outside the study, with her hand flat against the cold stone wall, and her eyes closed for a moment, she stood and let the weight of the last 20 minutes settle where it would. Bet appeared around the far corner with the accuracy of someone who had been listening for footsteps. She looked at Elara's face and did not ask how it had gone. She simply fell into step beside her, and they walked together toward the smaller dining room. And Bet talked about the apple tart that had come out of the kitchen that afternoon, and whether there would be any left, and Elara listened and breathed, and was grateful for it. This is the moment in a Duke Royal Tales story where everything is about to break open. If you have not already subscribed, please do it now. This channel is built on stories like this one, and every subscriber makes the next story possible. Stay with us. Fenwick Crane came to dinner. He sat at the long table in the formal dining room in his evening coat, with his pleasant face arranged into its pleasant expression. And he made pleasant conversation about nothing in particular for the first 2 courses. And Aldrich Vane ate and listened and gave nothing away, which was a thing he was extraordinarily good at. He had spent 3 years in the North learning to give nothing away. It was the most reliable skill he had brought home. Lady Sybil sat 4 places from the Duke at the dinner table. She was more animated than usual, her beauty turned up slightly, her conversation more pointed. She was performing, Aldrich understood, the final act of a campaign. She was reminding him of everything she could offer, because she knew that what was coming next was meant to remind him of everything Elara Moss could not. The moment arrived between the 3rd course and the 4th. Fenwick allowed a pause in the conversation to settle, and then he said, in the mild, carrying voice of a man making an observation, that he had been in the village that morning and had found it quite a pleasant place. He had spoken with several people who knew the area well. He had been surprised, he said, by a particular name that had come up in conversation. A name connected to the county, connected, in fact, to a member of the current household. He said her father's name. He told the story the way it had been told for 4 years in Alarwick, stripped of complication, stripped of the letter that had arrived 6 months too late. A physician, a death, a disgraced practice. A daughter who had apparently found employment in good houses despite the shadow of the name. He said it pleasantly, as though it were simply information, as though he were doing everyone at the table a service by sharing it. The table went quiet. Lady Josephine at the far end had gone white. Lady Sybil was looking at the Duke with an expression of composed concern. Georgiana Vane, the Duke's aunt, was looking at her nephew with the still, watchful expression of a woman who has learned to read him and is reading him now. Aldrich set down his fork. He did not raise his voice. He had learned in the North that the quieter you spoke, the more carefully people listened. "The physician you are describing," he said, "was my own physician's colleague in his training years. I have been aware of Dr. Moss's history for some time." He paused. "I am also aware that the accusation made against him was false, as was confirmed by written testimony from a member of the Farr family, which testimony has been in the possession of the county solicitor for over 3 years and has never been properly acted upon. I intend to see that it is." He looked at Fenwick directly. "I appreciate your concern. It was not required." The dinner table did not produce a sound for approximately 4 full seconds. Fenwick Crane's pleasant expression had developed a crack in it. He recovered, because he was practiced, but the crack had been visible and everyone at the table had seen it. Lady Sybil's composed concern had changed into something she was working harder to control. She was looking at the Duke with a different expression now. The expression of a woman who has understood that the ground she was standing on has shifted and is deciding whether to stand still or move. "Your Grace," Lady Sybil said, and her voice was perfectly steady, which was remarkable. "I think we were all only concerned for you. In the matter of a connection of any kind, it is natural to want to be certain of all relevant circumstances." "It is," Aldrich said. "I am certain of the circumstances I find relevant. Thank you, Lady Sybil." He looked back at his plate. "Shall we continue?" They continued. The conversation recovered, the way conversations always do, because enough people at any dinner table are willing to pretend that the last 5 minutes did not happen. The food was brought. The wine was poured. Elara was not at the dinner table. She was in the smaller dining room with the attendants and companions, eating quietly with Bet beside her, and she did not know what was happening 40 feet away in the formal dining room. Not yet. But Bet had arranged to know as soon as it was knowable, and Bet came back from a brief, unexplained disappearance at the end of the third course, with the expression of someone carrying information that has weight to it. She told Elara quietly, leaning close, her voice barely above a breath. Elara sat at the table with her hands in her lap, and her face entirely still, and felt something move through her that she could not name. Not relief, exactly. Relief was what you felt when a threat was removed. This was something larger and less familiar. This was the feeling of someone having stood between you and something harmful, not because they were required to, not because they had calculated the benefit, but because they had decided, plainly and without announcement, that the truth mattered more than the convenience of staying quiet. She pressed her hand flat to the table for a moment, just to feel something solid. Then she folded her napkin and excused herself and walked through the back passage and up the rear stairs to the landing that overlooked the formal garden. And she stood there in the dark and breathed in the cold night air and looked at the stars over the vain court grounds. And she thought about her father, who had moved toward frightened things his whole life and had been punished for being in the room when something happened that he could not have stopped. She thought about a man who had set down his fork and spoken quietly and changed the shape of a story that had been wrong for 4 years. She thought, I am in very serious difficulty. She went back inside. Lady Sybil came to find her the next morning. Elara was in the passage near the library, carrying a small stack of Lady Josephine's correspondence to the morning room, when she heard footsteps that were not uncertain. She turned and found Lady Sybil walking toward her with the composed expression of someone who had made a decision in the night and had arrived at it fully committed. They stood in the corridor. I will be honest with you, Lady Sybil said. Please, Elara said. I have been planning this for a long time. Not this gathering specifically, but this outcome. I understood what it required. I was not wrong about my qualifications. I am not wrong about what I could give this house. She paused. I was wrong about you. Not wrong that you were an obstacle. Wrong about what kind of obstacle. She looked at Elara with those pale gray eyes. You are not a liability he is overlooking. You are the thing he has been looking for and did not know it. There is a difference, and I am experienced enough to recognize it. Elara looked at her steadily. What are you telling me? I am telling you, Lady Sybil said, that I am withdrawing from the selection, and I am telling you directly rather than through a letter or a departure, because if the situation were reversed, I would want it done directly. The corridor was quiet. Somewhere in the house a door closed. Outside, the late autumn light came through the high window at the end of the passage in a long, pale bar. I am sorry, Elara said, because she genuinely was, not for herself. For the 8 years, for the planning, for the certainty that it met something it had not accounted for. Do not be, Lady Sybil said. It is useful information. She said it without warmth, but also without bitterness, and Elara thought that in a different arrangement of the world, in a different story, this was a woman she might have understood. She gave a short, precise nod. Then she turned and walked back the way she had come. Elara stood in the corridor for a moment. Then she went to deliver Lady Josephine's correspondence. Aldrich found her in the East Garden that afternoon. It was not planned, not on her part. She had gone out because the house had felt close, and she needed air, and she had taken the path near the dormant rose beds because it was the least populated route, and she did not particularly want to be navigated around by chaperones. He was already there when she turned the corner at the low stone wall, standing with his hands behind his back and looking out at the fields beyond the garden wall with the expression she was beginning to understand was simply his face when he was not managing anything. He turned when he heard her footsteps. He did not look surprised. Lady Sybil is leaving, he said. I know, she said. She told me herself. He looked at her. She spoke to you directly. She is that kind of woman, Elara said. And then, because it was true, I respected her for it. He was quiet for a moment. He turned back to the view over the fields. The day was cold and pale and clear, the kind of autumn afternoon that gives you the landscape without any softening, everything precisely as it is. She stood beside him at the wall and looked at the same fields, and for a while neither of them said anything, and the silence was the particular kind that does not ask to be filled. Tell me something true, he said finally. It was the way he asked questions she had noticed, directly and without ceremony. About what? She said. About what you want. He paused. Not what you think is possible, what you actually want. She looked at the pale fields and considered this. She did not deflect. She was not a deflecting person, and he had earned a real answer. I want a house that is mine, she said, not borrowed, not occupied in the margins of someone else's life. I want to wake up in a room that I chose and have an opinion about the arrangement of it. I want to be the person someone comes to when there is a problem, not because I am convenient, but because they have decided that my mind is the one they want on the problem. She paused. I want to matter to someone in a way that does not require me to make myself smaller to fit the shape they have already made. She looked at him. You asked for something true. I did, he said. He was looking at the fields. And I will give you one in return. He was quiet for a moment, gathering it. I went to the north 3 years ago because it was required. I had an obligation. I do not regret that I went. He stopped. He started again. I lost someone there, a man who had been my friend since we were boys. He was standing beside me when it happened, and I was not able to do anything to change what happened, and I came home carrying the particular weight of that, which is a weight I have not found any way to set down. He turned to look at her. I came home and found that I had lost the habit of wanting things. Not the ability, the habit. I had gotten so good at managing and not feeling and being present without being present that it had become the only register I knew. He paused. And then I watched you walk across a wet courtyard toward a frightened horse in a storm, and something happened in me that I have not been able to account for since. The east garden was very still. The bare rose stems caught the afternoon light and held it. A bird moved through the hedge and was gone. Calder, she said, and then stopped. He went very still. She had used his given name, not his title. He turned to look at her fully. I am sorry, she said immediately. I did not mean to. Do not apologize, he said, and his voice was entirely certain and entirely quiet. Say it again. She looked at him. At the face that had been managing things for 3 years and was, at this precise moment, managing nothing. At the dark eyes that were fully open and fully present and asking her for something without the armor of indirection. Aldrich, she said. He breathed out slowly. The way a man breathes when he sets something down that has been very heavy for a very long time. They stood at the stone wall in the east garden in the pale autumn light, and she did not look away from him, and he did not look away from her, and the distance between them was the precise distance between a question and an answer. There is something I want to say to you, he said. Not here, not like this. He paused. Tonight, the library after dinner. Come if you are willing. I will come, she said. She walked back to the house with her hands folded in front of her, and the knowledge that everything that came next was going to require her to be exactly as brave as she had ever been. She was not afraid. She was, which was entirely different, ready. The library after dinner was warm and quiet. The fire had been built up, and the room smelled of old books and beeswax, and the particular quality of a room that has held important conversations before and is prepared to hold another. She had worn the best dress she had, a deep blue wool that had been her mother's, altered twice since, and she had let her hair down slightly from its practical arrangement into something that was still herself, but had stopped pretending that no one was looking. He was there when she came in. He had not waited sitting down. He was standing at the center of the room, and he turned when she entered, and looked at her in the way he had looked at a corner of a courtyard on the first night of the storm, with the full, direct, searching intensity of a man who has found the specific thing he was looking for and is no longer looking anywhere else. She closed the door. She stood across from him. He spoke without preamble, because he was a man who said things plainly, and she had long since decided that this was the quality she most valued in him. I have spent 26 days at this house, managing a process I did not particularly want to be part of, he said. I agreed to it because it was required, and because the people who arranged it love me, and I was not willing to cause them the disappointment of refusing. And I moved through the first 4 days of this gathering in the particular way I have been moving through things since I came home from the north, correctly, appropriately, giving nothing too much and wanting nothing enough to name it. He paused. And then there was a storm and a frightened horse, and a woman in a gray cloak who walked toward it instead of away from it, and I have not been able to return to the managing since. The fire moved in the hearth. Outside the wind pressed quietly against the library windows, not the storm of the first night, something gentler, the kind of wind that is simply moving through the world without emergency. "I am not a man who does this easily," he said. "You know that. You have watched me for 5 days and you understand what I am, which is a person who has practiced distance until it became the default and is now standing in front of you trying to say something that has no practice behind it." He crossed the room. He stood in front of her, close enough that she had to look up to hold his gaze, and she held it. "I want you to stay," he said, "not as Lady Josephine's companion, not as a guest, not as a candidate, not as any of the categories this week has constructed. I want you to stay as yourself, which is the only person I have wanted anything to do with since the night of the storm." He paused. "I want to know whether you are willing." The library was very still. The fire was the only sound. She looked at the man in front of her, at the face that had been to the north and come back changed, that had learned to manage everything and was, at this precise moment, offering her the thing underneath the management, at the hands that were not quite still, at the eyes that were open all the way through. "I came to this house," she said, "to do a function, to manage Lady Josephine's correspondence and her nerves and her social schedule and the approximately 12 small daily disasters that occur in any household when someone is anxious. I came expecting to be invisible, because that is what I have always been in other people's arrangements, and I had made my peace with it." She paused. "And then you asked your secretary to find out who the woman in the gray cloak was, and you came to the library, and you listened to me in the study on the 4th night without flinching, and I discovered that I had not, actually, made my peace with being invisible at all. I had simply stopped hoping for anything else." She looked at him steadily. "I am willing," she said. "I want you to know that I am saying that clearly, with full understanding of what it means and no confusion about the difficulty of what comes after. I am not naive about this. I am also not afraid of it." She paused. "I want you to be present the way you have been present this week, fully, without the armor." She said it gently, but precisely. "Because I have seen what you are underneath it, and that is the person I am saying yes to." He reached out and took her hand, carefully the way careful men touch important things. She turned her hand and held his back. They stood in the firelit library while the wind moved against the old windows of Vane Court, and the house settled around them into its familiar evening sounds. And nothing needed to be performed or managed or explained, and it was, simply and entirely, enough. Down the corridor, in the small sitting room near the front hall, Lady Georgiana Vane was sitting with a glass of sherry and an expression that she was working to keep composed and not entirely succeeding with. Marcus Webb stood beside her, his clipboard held loosely at his side. "Should I update the arrangements?" he asked. Georgiana took a sip of sherry. "Tell Cook there will be one additional setting at the family table starting tomorrow," she said. "And find me Mr. Aldrist Pemberton's address. He is the best solicitor in the county, and I intend to write to him first thing in the morning about a certain physician's reputation that has been waiting 4 years for someone with the right resources to correct it." Marcus made a note. "Anything else?" "Yes," she said. She set down her glass. "Nothing else. That is everything." The announcement was made the following morning, in the manner of announcements at Vane Court, which was to say that the Duke came to breakfast and made it plainly, without ceremony, looking at the people assembled around the table with the direct gaze of a man who has made a decision and is not interested in negotiating the outcome. He said that the gathering had fulfilled its purpose. He said that he had found, in the course of the week, the person he intended to ask to be his wife, and that he intended to ask her this morning, and that he wanted his household to have that information from him directly before it reached them through other channels. He said her name. Lady Josephine, who was a genuinely kind woman, made a sound that was not quite a cry and not quite a laugh, pressed both hands to her face, and looked at Elara across the table with shining eyes and said, "Oh, Elara, I am so glad." And she meant it completely, which was the best and only thing that needed to be said. Georgiana Vane held her composure until after breakfast. Then she stood in the entrance hall with her hand pressed briefly to her heart, which she permitted herself for approximately 3 seconds, before putting it down and returning to her practical self. The remaining candidates and their families departed over the course of the day with varying degrees of grace. Most were gracious. A few were not, but managed the appearance of it. One family's carriage was loaded and moving within an hour, which Bet, watching from the upper window, reported to Elara with the focused glee of someone observing history. Elara sat in the library that morning and wrote 2 letters. The first to Lady Josephine, which was a letter of genuine affection and gratitude, because Josephine had brought her to this house without knowing what she was delivering, and that deserved acknowledging. The second to the county solicitor, which she wrote carefully, setting down every fact she knew about her father's case, the letter from Thomas Farr, the testimony available, the process never completed. She wrote it in the plain, precise manner she used for important things. She sealed both and sent them with the morning's post. Then she sat in the chair by the window and looked at the east garden below, where the dormant rose stems were winding their bare tendrils against the old stone wall, and thought about her father, who had told her once, when she was very young, sitting on the fence beside his horse at the Alarwick stables, that the only thing worth doing in a frightening situation was to keep your voice calm and keep moving forward, because fear was not a signal to stop. Fear was simply information that told you the thing in front of you mattered. She thought it had taken a long time to understand the full weight of what he meant. She thought she understood it now. When the spring came, Vane Court woke slowly, the way old estates do, with crocuses appearing first along the garden walls, and then the early roses beginning to show color on the east garden's climbing stems, and the light returning to the windows with an honesty that autumn and winter do not permit. Elara had been at Vane Court through all of it, the tail end of autumn, and the full weight of winter, and now the first warmth coming back into the stone, and she had spent those months becoming something she had not known she was becoming until she looked around and found she was already there. She had learned the house, not the formal rooms, those she had known within a week, but the real rooms, the places where decisions were made and problems were brought and solved. The study and the estate office, and the long working room where Marcus managed the correspondence, and the kitchen, where Bet had already become the person Elara went to when she needed something honestly reported, and the east garden in the early morning where Aldrich went when he was thinking, and which she had begun to share with him before breakfast on the mornings, when the weather was bearable. She had learned that he woke before she did, and went to the window first, a habit from the north that he had not been able to lose. She had learned that he had a quality of stillness in the evening that meant he was somewhere inside himself that was not entirely comfortable, and was not asking for comfort, but was not opposed to company. She had learned that when he said something quietly, he meant it more than when he said it at a normal volume, which was the reverse of most people. She had also, over those months, done something she had not been asked to do and had not announced doing. She had taken the matter of her father's name to the county solicitor herself, with the Duke's introduction and the Duke's solicitor present, and she had submitted Thomas Farr's written testimony and 2 further testimonies she had gathered through correspondence, and she had sat in that solicitor's office in the town and made the case clearly, without apology or emotion, for the restoration of Dr. Emmett Moss's reputation. The formal restoration took 11 weeks. It was a document. It arrived in the post. She sat with it in the library at Vane Court and read it once, and then set it down on the table and pressed her hand flat to the surface and said, quietly, to no one and to her father, that she had done it. Aldrich found her there an hour later. He did not ask what the document said. He looked at her face and understood, and came and sat beside her and said nothing for a while, which was precisely the right thing. She thought, not for the first time, that she had spent a great deal of her life being told that quiet and useful and overlooked was the shape she was meant to occupy, and that she had, somewhere along the way, begun to believe it. The way you begin to believe a story you have heard enough times, even when it is not true. She thought that the correction of that belief had not come from a grand gesture, though there had been one of those, a man walking into a room and pointing at a corner and refusing to look anywhere else. It had come from the accumulation of small, plain, honest moments. The study at dusk, the east garden at dawn. A man who said, I believe you, and meant it entirely, and who had been present, fully present, in every moment between then and now. She thought that was what love was, not the pointing. The staying. On the morning of the wedding, Bet appeared at Elara's door at 6 in the morning with apple cake and a completely steady expression, and sat on the end of the bed while Elara's hair was being arranged, and talked continuously about the condition of the rose beds and the kitchen cat's latest philosophical objection to the arrangement of the furniture. And Elara listened and was grateful. Lady Josephine arrived an hour before the ceremony with her eyes already red and her heart entirely open, and she held Elara's hands and said, in the genuine, uncomplicated way she had always said everything, that she was happier for her than she had words for. And Elara believed her completely. Georgiana Vane stood in the corridor outside the chapel in her finest coat and looked at her nephew's wife walking toward her and felt the particular fierce, quiet pride of a woman who arranged something without knowing exactly what she was arranging and had gotten it exactly right. She said nothing. She did not need to. Marcus Webb stood at the back of the chapel with his clipboard held loosely at his side, the way he had held it on the night the Duke first asked a woman's name. He had long since stopped updating lists. This did not concern him. Bet had positioned herself near the chapel door with the strategic instincts she applied to everything, and was watching with an expression of comprehensive satisfaction. The chapel at Vane Court was old and stone, and smelled of beeswax and cold air, and the particular quality of a place that has held important things and knows what it is for. The light came through the high windows in clean, exact bars that fell across the stone floor, and the faces of the people assembled there. Aldrich was at the front. He turned when she came in. He looked at her the way he had looked at a courtyard in a storm, the way he had looked at a corner of a room, the full, complete, searching attention of a man who has found the specific thing he has been looking for, except that now there was nothing searching in it. It was not looking for anything. It was simply looking, openly and without reserve, at the person walking toward him. Elara walked down the aisle of that old stone chapel in her mother's blue dress, altered one final time, the seams taken out and the cuffs replaced with something finer, and she walked the way she had always moved through frightening things, steadily, with her voice calm in her own chest. Not because there was nothing to be afraid of, but because the thing in front of her mattered. She reached him. He took her hand. They said the words that people have said in that chapel for generations. Old words, simple words, the kind that do not require decoration to hold weight. They said them to each other in the plain, direct way that was the only register either of them had ever really known. The words landed where they were intended to land. When it was done, he held her hand and looked at her. And the first thing he said, quietly enough that only she heard it, was, "I was right." "About what?" she said. "About the gray cloak," he said. "About what I saw in the courtyard." He paused. "I thought I knew who you were from the first night. I was not wrong." She looked at him. At the face that was entirely present, entirely unmanaged, entirely the person inside it, without armor, without arrangement, simply there. "I was right too," she said. Outside the chapel, the spring morning was bright and clean, the kind of morning that does not apologize for being good. The climbing roses on the east garden wall had begun to bloom, small and pale and certain against the old stone. The light fell on everything equally. Elara stood in the April morning with her husband's hand in hers and looked out at the grounds of Vane Court and thought about corners, about the people who occupy them and are told that is where they belong, and about what happens when someone turns and looks and sees exactly what is there, not with obligation or performance, but with the plain, irreversible recognition of a person who knows what they want. She had spent years being useful in other people's stories. She had spent years stitching other people's hems and managing other people's mornings, and standing in the back of other people's rooms, and being the person no one needed to acknowledge, because she was simply there, handling things, being adequate and quiet, and good at what was required of her. This story was hers. She held his hand and felt the spring light on her face, and thought that her father had been right, that the only thing worth doing in a frightening situation was to keep your voice calm and keep moving forward. She had kept moving forward. She had moved toward the frightening thing every time it had mattered, and the frightening thing had turned out to be a man at a stone wall with an empty cup, learning to want something again. She thought, "I am exactly where I was always moving toward." She held on. The light fell where it would. It was warm, and it was honest, and it was entirely, completely hers. If this story moved you, here is all that Duke Royal Tales asks of you. Like this video. Leave a comment below telling us which moment was your favorite. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a story like this one. Share it with someone who believes in the kind of love that looks at the corner, not the line. Every view, every comment, every subscription is what keeps this channel alive and keeps the stories coming. This has been Duke Royal Tales. Thank you for being here. We will see you in the next story.